Do you want to know more about how you can eat for better health and longevity, and how your diet and lifestyle can play a part in chronic disease? Then you're in the right place. I'm Claire Day.
And I'm Daisy Lund, and we are both plant-based doctors with a passion for improving nutritional education. In this podcast, we will bring you all the latest medical evidence on how a plant-based diet can improve your health whilst being kinder to the planet and fairer to the animals that we share it with.
Twice a month, we bring you interviews from experts in the field with a focus on an important topic related to plant-based health, all while sharing recipes and food ideas.
So, welcome to In a Nutshell, the Plant-Based Health Professionals podcast.
Hello everyone, and welcome to The Nutshell. Hi Daisy, how are you?
Hi Claire, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I'm still dreaming of our wonderful tofu eggs that we ate this week in Exeter.
Yes, I know what you mean about that. We had a great trip to Exeter to hear George Monbiot talk about shifting to plant-based diets for planetary health, alongside PBHP's ambassador, Dr. Alan Desmond.
Yeah, it was really excellent. The talk and the food, both incredible. But the highlight of the trip for me, as I say, were the tofu eggs the next morning. So big shout out to Sacred Grounds Cafe in Exeter, who served this most incredible tofu turned into what looked like a poached egg. Honestly, it was, I'd never seen anything like it. I travelled back to Exeter for that alone. So if you're in the area, we would suggest you run down there and try them immediately.
Yes, we learned that they were one of the few good things to come out of the COVID lockdown was the Sacred Grounds Cafe, learning how to make them. Well, this week we start the first part of our two-part series on obesity. We have not just one, but two really fascinating guests over the next two episodes. In today's episode, we talk with Dr. Sue Kenneally, who is a GP with a special interest in obesity. Alongside her GP work, Sue works in a specialist obesity clinic and is a GP tutor in obesity and weight management at the University of South Wales, as well as director of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine.
Sue gave us some excellent practical suggestions on weight management on a plant-based diet, alongside what can be offered in specialist clinics, both in terms of medical and surgical interventions. And Claire, your ears pricked up when she mentioned tofu, didn't it?
Yes, but disappointingly, she didn't mean the plural of tofu. But we learned what a tofu is, and it's an acronym for thin on the outside and fat on the inside.
Yeah.
We really hope you enjoy this episode as much as we did, and stay tuned for part 2, where we'll be speaking to Professor Christopher Damon, all the way from the University of Washington. He's a clinical associate professor of gastroenterology with an interest in the microbiome and the role of gut health in relation to weight management.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating episodes coming up. But please, listeners, if you're enjoying our content, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating or a review. It's just a click of a button to leave us a 5-star review. And every time you do that, it will help others find us and help us spread the word on the benefits of plant-based eating. Okay, so this week we welcome Dr. Sue Kenneally. Sue is a GP with a special interest in lifestyle medicine and in particular obesity and weight management. Alongside her medical qualifications, Sue obtained an MSc in nutritional medicine in 2017 and is now the regional group lead of the Association for the Study of Obesity. She's also a board member of the Welsh Obesity Society, a member of the GPs with an interest in nutrition group, and a tutor in obesity and weight management at the University of South Wales, as well as a director of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine.
Sue is passionate about lifestyle and health and hopes to inspire and empower her patients to transform their lives by making simple changes. She appears on TV and radio interviews, whilst also speaking at academic and clinical meetings, advising other doctors and health professionals about the importance of lifestyle medicine. So that's a really impressive portfolio. Let's go straight into our topic for today. We really want to gather and condense all your expertise on obesity and weight management. And we would say, it's really hard to avoid the headlines on obesity at the moment. So can you start by giving us what you think is a good overview of the current problem and what the trends have been?
Hi, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. It's a real honor to be here. So, to answer your question, yes, we have a problem. So, the trend with obesity is that maybe 40 or 50 years ago, very few people were living with obesity, and it was quite a rarity. And over the last 40 to 50 years, we've seen a rapid increase, more or less globally, certainly through first world and second world countries, where the rate of obesity is increasing rapidly. It's increasing slightly more slowly now, but it's still increasing, and we're yet to find it leveling off anywhere. So we know that in the UK, for example, about 25 to 30% of people are living with obesity, depending on where you live, and 2/3 of people are living with overweight and or obesity. So it's an increasingly common problem, and it's one that's significantly affecting us as a population, as an NHS, as human beings.
And, you know, we use these terms overweight and obese, and they're not completely interchangeable, are they? So can you explain what the difference is when we talk about, you know, different levels of obesity, BMI, things like that? Can you explain why we use these terms?
Yes, absolutely. So we tend to use the term body mass index, and I know there are limitations of it. I know it's not perfect. So your body mass index relates your height to your weight, and a body mass index of 20 to 25 approximately is normal. 19 or less is considered underweight, 25 to 30 is considered overweight, and then 30 and above is considered obesity. People listening to this will no doubt be saying, well, I know about body mass index and it doesn't mean anything to me because I work out really hard, so I might be overweight, but I carry a lot of muscle, so I'm healthy. And you would be correct. Body mass index is really most useful when we look at populations. So if you look at 1,000 people with obesity, say body mass index of 40, and compare them with 1,000 people with a body mass index of 20, and you can draw really significant, useful conclusions from those comparisons. But if you're comparing just one individual with another individual with very different body mass indexes, that's not necessarily so useful. So we use it as a rough guide, but we always have to be mindful of the limitations that you may be what's known as a TOFI, which is thin on the outside but fat on the inside. So your body's technically a healthy weight, but your body fat percentages may be too high. And equally, the obvious comparison is international athletes, rugby players, that kind of thing, who are technically very overweight because of their body mass index, but a lot of that is muscle, and so they would be considered healthy. So it's a rough guide.
And can you say anything about whether, if you're a particular ethnicity, whether that sort of being 20 to 25, is that the right measure to use if you're, I don't know, if you're black, if you're Asian, is it still the same?
Yeah, so if you come from certain ethnic minorities, then you do have an increased risk of things like heart disease at a lower weight. So we tend to say that if you're of black ethnic origin or you're particularly from South Asia, then when we talk about body mass index, you should probably lower the numbers by about 2 to 2.5. So if we say 30 is living with obesity for somebody who's Caucasian, then we probably would say 27.5 or 27 for someone who's black or from South Asia.
Okay, that's good to know. Every so often, I do grab a tape measure and do a waist circumference on if I see like a man who looks quite slim, but I think that I might be able to, you know, shed some light on them actually having a problem with their weight through using a tape measure. Is that a good thing to do?
Yes, it's a good rough and ready way of checking your health, actually. We like to say that your waist circumference should be half your height. So if you're, let's say, 60 inches tall, 5 foot, I know not many people are, but if you're 5 feet tall, 60 inches, then your waist circumference should be no more than 30 inches. Now, that's all to do with where you're carrying your fat. So we know that people who carry their fat around their hips and thighs, they may not like the appearance of it, but actually it's quite healthy. That is a good fat store because your body does not know that you live in the 21st century in a population where there's abundant food all the time. Your body and your brain still think that you live in a hunter-gatherer society where you might encounter a famine at any time. So it wants you to store fat to prepare for that famine. Now, of course, we know that's not coming, but your body doesn't know that. So storing fat there is actually metabolically very healthy. If you store fat around your middle, and that would increase your waist circumference, then that suggests that your distribution of fat is not stored in a healthy way. And that's the kind of fat that causes problems for you in the long term, because it's stored around your internal organs. So it's putting pressure on your liver and your pancreas and your kidneys and other things. And that's the stuff that tends to impact your health in the long term. So waist circumference is actually really, really useful because it's easy to do. You can do it at home and it's very straightforward.
Yeah, and it does show up those people, doesn't it, who might have a normal BMI, but their waist height circumference is out of range. If you have an otherwise healthy lifestyle, but you are overweight or even slightly in the obese category, is that always a problem? Or are there people who could still argue that they're carrying extra weight, but they are compensating in all the other ways, exercise, quality food? Do we really need to worry about weight itself?
That's a complex question. And I think there are interesting answers to this. So I think if you're very overweight, then I think you probably can't make that argument. You may be getting away with it. So say your body mass index is 50. I have these people in my clinic, actually, my NHS clinic, whereby then they've been told, for example, for fertility reasons, that they want to access NHS fertility, and they've been told by the gynecologist that quite rightly the guidelines say their body mass index needs to be lower. It needs to be about 35 or 30, depending on where you are. But for them, that's the only reason they're in my clinic. Their blood pressure's fine. They don't have diabetes. They don't have any aches and pains. It's not affecting their mood. And metabolically, they seem absolutely fine. Now, we don't know whether that's going to continue to be the case long term, but I do know plenty of people in my clinic who are only there because they want to access other treatment and actually are pretty healthy in themselves. I think that's unusual. We do know that on a population level, as your weight goes up, your risk of chronic diseases also goes up. But we all know people who live like a saint but can't lose any weight. And we also know people who treat their body with, I might say, complete contempt and really enjoy it and never gain an ounce. So it is complicated. So overall, I think there are one or two people, and probably more, who can say, actually, carrying a lot of extra weight, I feel great. This isn't a problem for me. And if that's the case, well, fantastic. But I think that's not the experience of most people.
So not all of our listeners will be aware of what health problems might be directly linked to weight. You've mentioned sort of cardiovascular risk factors and things, but what does the evidence say about the links between obesity and poor health?
It says a lot. So we know that obesity is linked with an increased risk, and this is not a guarantee. So if you're listening and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm now definitely going to get these things, it's not. It's just an increased risk of things like heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes is a big one, fatty liver, polycystic ovaries and endometriosis, a number of cancers, including breast, endometrium, prostate, bowel. I think that's probably the most common ones. And of course, there are the difficulties with the just actual physical weight. So things like arthritis can be a big problem because of the pressure on your joints. And the relationship between obesity and mood is quite complicated as well, because living with extra weight that you don't want to be living with, because we must acknowledge that not everybody wants to lose any extra weight. As we've said, there are lots of people who are living with extra weight and they're very happy with that, and I salute them entirely. But if you're living with weight that you don't want to live with and you can't lose it, that can be very depressing. And equally, being depressed can lead to weight gain. So that's kind of a bidirectional relationship. So it's associated with a lot, and it makes a big difference if we can help people to lose weight if they want to.
And why do some people really struggle to lose weight? And I'm thinking, we know that some people do overeat, and that's clear, but are there genetic factors, for example, that predispose some people to being just naturally overweight?
Yes, there are. So the first thing I want to say on this subject is, if you're living with extra weight and you don't want to be, I have to tell you, it's almost certainly not your fault. Okay. So enough with the blame, enough with the shame. You need to start thinking differently. Okay, this is not your fault. So looking at genetics to begin with, we know that 40 to 70% of body weight is determined by genetics. So there's a good chance that it's related to your genes in some way. Having said that, when we've looked at the genome studies, where we look at people's genes and try and identify what's causing what particular change, we can only identify 2% of that 40 to 70% as being specifically related to particular genes. Everything else seems to be just a general cause somehow related to genes, and that's something that we're still working on. We still don't know the reasons for that. So that's your genetics, but it's also about literally 100 other things. There was the Foresight report published in 2007 and reviewed in 2014, and that sounds like a long time ago now, but that's actually only 10 years. And that was a group of some of the key thinkers in obesity at the time in the UK, who put together the report looking for the different causes of obesity and weight gain, hoping that they could find things that they could change. And they identified that there are approximately 100 causes of weight gain and obesity in the UK, and almost all of those are beyond the conscious control of almost all people, which is why I say if you're living with extra weight that you don't want to have, then it's almost certainly not your fault. So it could be genetics, it can be about your physiology, your endocrinology, your hormones, it can be about your diet, it can be about your exercise, your family environment, your stress levels, your sleep. It can be, as I say, about 100 different things, and it's very complicated to tease out which of those things it could be and which ones you can change, because most of them you can't. It's quite tricky.
So, I mean, on that note of kind of stress levels and poor sleep, and, you know, it's everywhere that we need to improve our lifestyles. Is there any evidence that we're actually sort of living in the middle of an epidemic, if you like, of, for want of a better word, of emotional overeating?
Yes, absolutely. We can see that clearly all around us, and I think the scientific literature supports that. So I see emotional eating in a lot of my patients. Most of my work now is in an obesity service. I do a small amount of general practice besides that. So in my NHS practice, most people who come to see me, when we ask them, what's your problem? How did the weight go on in the first place? Most of them say, because I'm an emotional eater. So it's everywhere. And of course, it's become a lot easier. So going back maybe 40 years, maybe we would have liked to have used food to soothe our emotions, because it really does work as a drug. It works on dopamine, which is the hormone of wanting more. But really, most of the time, 40 years ago, we lived on generally healthy home-cooked foods with the occasional treat. In that time, the food industry has spent a lot of time and money creating foods and ready meals and snacks and treats for us that really do act as a drug in terms of soothing us and helping us to soothe our emotions with food. So maybe 40 years ago, we soothed ourselves differently, but it's much more easy to emotionally eat these days, because those tasty, delicious foods that absolutely work as comfort in the acute setting really are readily available now, and they're cheap and easily obtainable. So yeah, absolutely, we are emotionally eating, myself included, far more than we should as a population.
And I think that is what makes it so difficult for healthcare professionals who are encountering patients sort of on a daily basis for other reasons, and where weight may turn out to be a factor in their health. And this is obviously, if somebody comes to a weight loss clinic, it's much easier because they're there to talk about their weight. But if you think about a 10-minute consultation that a nurse or a GP is having, what about for them? They might feel uncomfortable bringing up someone's weight in the context of fat shaming people. Should we be having these conversations? And if we should be having them, how do we even start in the sort of brief encounters that we have with patients?
This is so important, and I'm really glad we're talking about this. So the first thing to say is, if you're a GP or a practice nurse, it's not 10 minutes. It's many multiples of 10 minutes over many years, hopefully. And it's a bit more difficult these days because general practice has become a bit more fragmented. I remember the days of being the family doctor, and everyone in the family went to see you and you knew everybody's family history going back a couple of generations. It's a bit more fragmented now, but it's still a solid relationship that you can build with people. So it's not just 10 minutes. But to answer your question about in the 10-minute consultation, I think the way we recommend to proceed is to follow the 5 A's of obesity. And we see that a lot in lifestyle medicine. So we talk about ask permission to discuss the subject, and then assess, and then agree a plan, and assist the patient to implement the plan, and so on. But the reason that I wanted to bring this up is to say the first A with obesity is always ask permission. So what I do in my general practice consultations is, say I'm dealing with someone who has hypertension, I think you mentioned that. I'll talk to the patient and say, So, we can start you on some medication, but it may be possible to help this through lifestyle too. What changes do you think you could make in order to help with your blood pressure? And if you listen long enough, bearing in mind you only have 10 minutes, eventually most people who are living with excess weight will say, well, I could think about losing some weight. And so I wait for them to bring it up. And then I say, I think you're right. Is that something that you want to talk about today, or does it not feel like the right time for you? And some people will say, actually, I've been wanting to talk to my doctor for a long time about this. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. And other people say, actually, no, that's too difficult right now, in which case we talk about other things. But it's asking permission in the first place is the big thing. When I talk to my general practice colleagues, they say there are two problems that they have. Number one, they don't know how to start the conversation. And number two, if somebody says, actually, yes, I really do want to talk about this and I want some help, please, the GP often doesn't know where to send the patient, and that's often because there are no services available. In about 50% of the UK, we know that specialist services are lacking, and then that puts the GP or the practice nurse or whoever in quite a difficult position because they've got a patient saying, yes, please help me, and maybe they don't have the resources to provide that help, so it can be difficult.
Yeah, I just want to pick up there, Sue, and we'll go into the services that are available on NHS in a bit more detail in a second. But say we did have that consultation, patient was interested, where do we start? I mean, on this podcast, we talk a lot about diet, and obviously we are the plant-based health professionals. So we like talking about plant-based health and nutrition and how that can help chronic disease. Would that be a good way to start?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I see a lot in my clinic is people talking about diet and exercise. So let's clear that up first. One of my favorite facts about exercise and weight loss is that on average, in order to burn 1 pound of fat, you need to run about 38 miles. All right, so that's not achievable for most people. The point that I'm making is diet is invaluable. Okay, it's wonderful. And that's where we need to start. Regarding exercise, it's also fabulous. It comes into its own when it comes to weight loss maintenance. So when you've lost weight and you want to keep it off, exercise is the thing you need to be doing. So that's the first thing to say. Exercise is not that beneficial when you're trying to lose weight in the first place. If you look at the evidence, diet and exercise combined is the best way, but exercise itself is contributing very little. So actually diet is where we need to be. And yeah, there's a wealth of evidence that the more plants you can incorporate into your diet, the more successful you're likely to be at losing weight. So advising people to eat more plant foods is definitely good advice.
And is the issue with exercise because it increases your appetite, so you're going to eat more? Is that true? Is that what the evidence is showing?
To some extent, but it's just the sheer amount that you have to do. 38 miles to burn a pound of fat seems like an awful lot. So let's take that down to a day. If you wanted to have a deficit of 300 calories, that's what a lot of people say would be a good deficit. So that's eating 300 calories less than you need, with the idea being that you lose some weight as a result. You can either go for a run for 30 to 40 minutes, or you can just skip dessert. Okay, and it seems much easier for most people to just skip dessert. You see what I mean? So that's why diet makes such a big difference compared to exercise.
Yeah, understood. And so advocating for a whole food plant-based diet, which me and Claire already do in the consultation, sometimes we get some questions about whole food plant-based being quite heavy in carbs, high carb diet, for example. And carbs seem to be a bit of the enemy to most weight loss, people who are trying to achieve weight loss. What do we say to that?
Okay, so it's perfectly possible to eat a whole food plant-based lower carb diet. All right, it's difficult to eat a no carb diet. I think it's impossible if you're eating a whole food plant-based diet. But if you look at low carb diets, even the omnivore low carb diets, they're not zero carbohydrate, they're just lower carbohydrate. So if you build your diet around nuts and seeds and tofu and fibrous vegetables rather than starchy vegetables and berries rather than bananas and that kind of thing, it's very possible to do. I've done a couple of low carb whole food plant-based diets just to see what effect it had on me out of interest. And it did get a little bit monotonous in the long term, but then I didn't plan to do it in the long term. And I'm sure I could have made it more interesting if I did want to pursue it long term. But actually, it's easy enough to do. That's not the question you asked me, though. The question is about carbohydrates. I'm not too concerned about carbohydrates. I think if you're eating a whole food plant-based diet and it's containing a lot of carbohydrates, as long as they're healthy carbohydrates, which they should be on a whole food plant-based diet, then I think it's really not a problem and you should find that you're losing weight. There are lots of reasons why plants are good for you. It's all to do with energy density and your gut bugs and your hormones. And I'd love to talk more about those if that would be okay.
Yes, please. Yes, we'd love to hear.
Okay, so let's think about energy density, which is the big thing. So energy density is the amount of calories in a volume of foods or a weight of food. So a pound or a kilo of food, or a mouthful or a spoonful. And we know from previous research done many years ago now that most of us eat about the same weight of food per day. So that's not to say we all eat the same. So my husband is a foot taller than me and a very keen runner. So he eats a lot more weight of food than I do. But he eats about the same weight of food per day, and I eat about the same weight of food per day myself. But our weights are different. It stands to reason, and I'll make it ridiculous just to prove the point. I eat probably about 3 to 4 pounds of food a day. And it's very clear that 3 to 4 pounds of salad per day, not that I recommend that, is going to do very different things to me from 3 to 4 pounds of chocolate. Okay, I'm sure that's self-evident. And that's a lot to do with energy density. So if you eat 3 to 4 pounds or 5 to 6 pounds or whatever it is for you of things that are low energy density, you'll fill up very quickly on healthy food because all the low energy density foods are healthy foods, and that will give you very little opportunity to overeat. So the lowest energy density foods are your berries and your leafy greens and your fibrous vegetables. And then the next things are the fruits and starchy vegetables. And at this point, you're still fine. If you want to just base your diet on those, that would be a very low energy density and that would be fine. And then the next things are the whole grains. Whole grains are still fine. Now, if you ate only whole grains, that's an energy density whereby you probably would start to overeat if you didn't combine them with fruits and vegetables. And then you've got things like nuts and seeds, which are more energy dense, which is why we say eat them less often. I eat nuts daily and seeds daily, but in small amounts, compared with fruits and vegetables, which I eat without any limitations at all. And then you get up to the other foods, like things we would say to avoid on a plant-based diet, like the meat and dairy and those kind of things, and the sweet treats and the junk. They tend to be the very energy dense foods. So if you base your diet on what we say as whole food plant-based professionals, which is fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and those kinds of things, then you will naturally be eating a relatively low energy density diet. So number one, energy density is really, really good. Number two, if you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, because we all know it's possible to be vegan and eat junk food all day. If you're eating a whole foods diet, then your body simply has to work harder to break down all the food that you're ingesting. So if you eat, say, a 400 calorie ready meal, most of the work of digestion is done for you. So you just eat it down, thoroughly enjoy it. I have them from time to time myself. I'm not perfect. But of those 400 calories, you'll probably end up absorbing and storing most of them. Whereas if you eat 400 calories of a healthy whole food plant-based diet, it takes a lot of energy to digest all that stuff. Now, you don't notice that. It's not like going to the gym and running, but behind the scenes where you don't notice it, your body's working extremely hard to break it all down and absorb it to the right place and transfer it around the body where it needs to go and all that kind of thing. And that takes quite a lot of calories. So if you eat 400 calories, you're probably only gaining about 320 to 350 calories off those 400. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you do that every day over a long time, that starts to add up very quickly. So that's another reason why it's whole food plant-based diets are key rather than junk food vegan diets. That makes a difference. If you want me to carry on, there's also your gut bugs, the zoo in your poo. For those of you who don't know, we all have millions, if not trillions, of bacteria living in our guts, and they're supposed to be there. They're part of our defense system and they're part of what keeps us healthy. And there are different types and they flourish and thrive depending on lots of things, including what we eat. And there are some types of bacteria that flourish and thrive really, really well on a plant-based diet. And then there are others that flourish and thrive really well if you eat more meat and dairy-based diets. And different types are associated with different types of weight changes in your diet. And it's no surprise that I'm talking about it on a whole food plant-based. The bacteria that help you keep slim and keep your weight down are the ones that love plant foods, okay? And then the ones that flourish when you eat meat and dairy are the ones that tend to help you gain weight. So that's another reason. And I've seen this with people following whole food plant-based diets. They say, this is magic. I don't know what's happening. There's something happening here that hasn't happened with any other diet that I've seen before. And I think gut bugs are a lot to do with it. And the last point probably is your hormones. As a weight loss physician, I prescribe a lot of GLP-1 injections, weight loss medications. So that's Skinny Jab, Ozempic, the kind of things that you see in the media at the moment. And that's working on a hormone called GLP-1. And the higher your levels of GLP-1, the more likely you are to be able to control your weight. And there was some wonderful research done a few years ago by Dr Carliova and her team showing that plant-based meals increase your GLP-1. It's effectively a very, very small dose of Skinny Jab on your plate. So plants are a nature's form of Skinny Jab. So I could go on all day about this, but those are the big takeaways in terms of why plants are good for you in terms of controlling your weight.
That's an amazing summary. Thank you, Sue. I've got so many questions. I'm trying to not forget them all.
Great.
I suppose the one that comes to mind is, do we know how those gut bugs in our microbiome actually help us to keep a healthy weight or even lose weight if we're eating more plants?
We have some understanding of it. So we have a better understanding of why the gut bugs associated with meat and dairy intake are associated with a weight gain. And that's through, it's called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, I think is what it's called. And if you eat meat and dairy, you tend to have lots of gut bugs that make that compound. And we know that that's associated with weight gain. And if you don't eat any animal or dairy-based products, then you probably don't have bacteria in your gut that make TMAO. So it's the absence of TMAO is a big one. As for specifically why the ones that are associated with weight loss are associated with weight loss, I think we understand that rather less. We just observed it to be true. So I'm sorry, but we can definitely say there's evidence about why the meat and dairy-based gut bugs are detrimental.
Yeah, and presumably there's research going on. This is an area of interest, isn't it, that we'll hopefully know more about?
Yeah, it's only been an area of interest for the last 10 to 20 years. So it's still emerging evidence, as we like to say in the scientific community.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I like the idea of that energy density, and I think that's something that we can use in the consultation when we're trying to explain these sorts of foods that people perhaps could eat more of and what to eat less of. But quite often we do get asked about nuts and seeds and avocados as they're higher in fat. And should these be avoided temporarily on a weight loss journey, or can they be included a little bit?
They should be included a bit. I think avoiding any macronutrient is not a good idea. So if you want to eat fat in your diet, you should eat fat in your diet. It's about getting healthy fats. So nuts in particular, I must admit, it's escaped my mind now. There's something about the way we metabolize nuts that makes them relatively okay to eat when we're trying to lose weight because our body handles them differently. Seeds and avocados, if you eat lots of them, then yes, that's going to be a problem because ultimately it is about, to some extent, eating less than we need. It's not just about that. It's about the whole picture. But eating more than we need isn't a great strategy when we're trying to lose weight, obviously. And it's easier to overeat if you're eating those kinds of things. But in small amounts, being very conscious of it and basing the rest of your diet around the fruits and the vegetables and the lower energy density foods, I think is absolutely fine. And I certainly eat nuts and certainly seeds every day, and it doesn't impact my weight. Now, that's not great science. Just saying, well, it works for me, so it's fine, is not the way to give advice. But I think the evidence supports that.
Yeah, brilliant. What is your advice on things like artificial sweetness and things that we see marketed as diet foods or low calorie or low fat foods in supermarkets?
Well, we advocate for a whole food plant-based diet, don't we? So I would say to avoid them. There isn't really any great artificial sweetener, and we don't know in the long term what these sweeteners are going to do to us, because to get that kind of data, you need to do very large prospective studies over a long time. And I don't think people have got the funding or the interest to do it, because the kind of people who have that kind of money are probably invested in the artificial sweetener business. And if they get negative results, then they've spent an awful lot of time and money to actually put themselves in a fair amount of trouble. So I think probably the kind of research that we need will struggle to get done. So my advice is just to stick to the whole food plant-based diet and use the natural sweeteners. So I was reading somewhere the other day that date powder is a very good sweetener. And of course, we know that blending up things like dates into your smoothies and that kind of thing can be very good. And just naturally occurring fruits, that they can add lovely sweetness to meals. So those kinds of things. And I'd stay away from the artificial ones.
Yeah, that's lovely. We love dates and things like that in porridge, don't we? So it makes
Definitely.
So we've talked a lot about what sorts of things to eat, and I think that's made it a lot clearer for me in terms of what I'm going to advise in consultations in future. But what about timing of eating? Because that seems to be quite a hot topic at the moment. People are talking about intermittent fasting or time restricted eating and the evidence to that. Would you recommend people try it?
If they want to. Yes, absolutely. So I've got a number of patients and friends and colleagues who practice time restricted eating very successfully. For anyone who doesn't know, time restricted eating is typically where you have a window of time in your day where you eat food and then the rest of the time that you don't. So people talk about having a 16-8 window, which is where you don't eat for 16 hours a day, bearing in mind you should be asleep for 8 of those hours, so it's not as tough as it sounds. And then 8 hours of the day where you would typically consume food. There's no evidence that reducing your window below 8 hours produces any additional weight loss. So I have some friends who say, oh, I'm doing 4 hours and then I'm having 20 hours without any food. That can be good for you in other ways, but there's no evidence that it'll produce any extra weight loss. So if you want to restrict your food to within 8 hours a day, you can. There's also thinking about, we say front loading can be a thing. That this is relatively recent research whereby if you eat more of your calories early in the day, we think now it probably doesn't produce any additional weight loss, but it produces the same amount of weight loss with you feeling less hungry. So if you've ever gone on a diet and been really hungry all day and really miserable, please don't do that. Just eat a whole food plant-based diet. Then you don't have to because you can eat in abundance. But if you want to do a tweak, try eating big breakfast, modest lunch, small dinner. The weight loss will be the same, but you'll be a lot happier. Now, there's one caveat. There are some people who just get too hungry and they can't do time restricted eating. I'm one of them. So if that's you, ignore it completely. Just eat regular meals, eat intuitively in tune with your hunger, and you should be fine. But if you're someone for which time restricted eating works, then absolutely I'd recommend it for you.
Yeah. And does it work because of general calorie restriction, or is there more to it than that? Is it hormonal? I mean, you hear a lot about insulin resistance being reduced on it and our reactions being different.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's both. You will naturally eat fewer calories if you've got less time in which to do it. But it also allows our body to go into rest and repair mode instead of having to do the work of digesting the food and transporting the calories around the body and all that kind of thing. So I've read the evidence too that certainly if you're doing time restricted eating, it can have benefits on your insulin sensitivity for sure. So it is a good thing to do if it's something that you're happy to do and it fits in with your lifestyle and you don't get too grumpy.
Yeah. And are there any, as GPs, are there any patients who shouldn't be doing it? Should we be sort of aware of any medical conditions where we wouldn't advise?
There probably are one or two. I can't call them to mind immediately. Obviously, if you're an insulin dependent diabetic, you need to be very careful. I think that would probably be the big one for me.
Yeah.
And if you've got any form of eating disorder, be very, very careful. But one of the reasons that we don't advocate this in my NHS clinic is my dietitians get very, very twitchy and they view it as almost a gateway to an eating disorder. So if you've had any history of eating disorder in the past, I really would strongly avoid time restricted eating and just eat intuitively, and small regular meals would be the thing. So I think diabetes and eating disorders will be the two big ones.
Well,
Right. So I want to ask you about what we can do when someone has slipped through our GP net. We've given the advice that they can lose weight on a whole food plant-based diet, but they can't do it. And they say, no, I've tried every diet. Please, can you refer me for weight loss services? What can someone expect on the NHS through a kind of tier 3, tier 4 weight loss service?
Okay, this is my happy place. This is where I live and work. So the first thing to say is we're getting there in terms of tier 3 and tier 4 services. And I'd explain what those are in a minute. At the moment, about 50% of the UK has access to one. And that sounds awful. But actually, if you go back 10 years, it was much worse. So we're heading the right direction. And there are some areas of the UK where I work as a GP because I do mainly remote work. And it's entirely frustrating because patients say, I need to lose weight, can you help me? And I have to say, well, actually, I'm a weight loss physician, but I have nowhere I can refer you in your local area. So that's the first thing to say. But if you are in the 50% of the population who has access, congratulations, that's wonderful. So what we would do in a tier 3 service, we accept your referral, we make sure it fits the criteria that we think we can help you. And then most places will offer you an initial consultation. Now, the first thing to say is people look very nervous when they first come in for their initial consultation because they think they're going to get shouted at and blamed and all that kind of thing. And actually, most services just want to get to know you in the first instance and identify where the problems are. Is it the binge eating? Is it emotional eating? Is it none of that and just your portion size is a bit big? Have you had childhood trauma that's affecting how you're eating? Is it your relationships? Any number of things. Once we've identified what the problem is, then in my services, you can attend an online program, which is all about psychology and diet. If you need to, you can have access to a psychologist one-to-one where you can talk about your particular difficulties. Obviously, we have dietitians. I have a physiotherapist who can get you moving if need be, because that's so important for keeping the weight off. And of course, I can prescribe weight loss medication. And then if somebody gets to the end of whatever treatment we've been able to offer them and says, well, actually, I still want to lose more weight, then we can refer people to tier 4 as long as they fit the criteria. And tier 4 is where the surgeons hang out. And that's where you get into the realms of weight loss surgery. And just to set out my stall at the beginning, I am a fan of weight loss surgery. So that's what you can expect in our specialist service.
Can I ask you specifically about, for people who go on to have weight loss surgery, be that the gastric sleeve, in fact, maybe I should ask you what the weight loss surgery options are. But what I did want to ask in particular are, does that preclude you then in the future going on to a whole food plant-based diet because of having a smaller stomach and things like that? Is it going to affect the way that you can eat in future?
Okay, a lot to unpack there. So the question that stands out for me from that is whole food plant-based. No, I don't think so. So let's talk about the surgeries. So a gastric sleeve or sleeve gastrectomy, depending on where you've listened or read, is not, as some people think, putting a sleeve around the stomach. It's actually removing most of the stomach so that it becomes like a tube, like a sleeve. So that does two things. Number one, it reduces the volume of your stomach for sure. And for many years, that's what surgeons thought they were doing. They said, well, if we reduce the size of somebody's stomach, then they'll have less room in which to put their food, and so they'll naturally eat less. And that is true. But research more recently has shown that actually, given the part of the stomach that they take away when they do the operation, which is the fundus, for anybody who's interested, the top bit, that's where most of your body's ghrelin is made, which is your biggest appetite driver. So when you have sleeve gastrectomy, what you're actually doing is effectively removing your biggest hunger hormone. So it's not just about having less room in your stomach, it's about having different hormones. And so you naturally want to eat less anyway. So that's the sleeve gastrectomy. The other operation that's also commonly available would be a gastric bypass. Now, that's all to do with contact of the food on your small intestines, which is the bit of your intestines just past your stomach. We know that when food touches that part of your intestines, that again changes your hormones. And that tends to increase your appetite and increase your weight. So if you can find a way to stop food from contacting that part of your bowels, then that will naturally reduce your appetite and also change your hormones. And that's what a bypass is. I won't get into the technical details, but it bypasses that part of your bowel and redirects your food through your bowels in a different way. So that's why it's called a bypass. So ultimately, yes, you need to be very aware of your diet after you've had surgery, certainly in the first 2 years. Once you get a bit more settled, it's a bit more easy and you can eat more normally. But in the initial processes, yes, you need to be very aware of protein. This is one time when you do have to ask, where do vegans get their protein? Maybe this is the one time, because it is important. And then your micronutrients, so your multivitamins, minerals, those kind of things. Perfectly possible on a whole food plant-based diet, as long as you're planning it very carefully, and you must take your supplements as prescribed. That's true for anyone after gastric surgery, regardless of their diet, must take your supplements. It's probably slightly more important for someone who's had a who's following a whole food plant-based diet, but it's true for all of us, anyone who's had metabolic surgery. And incidentally, that's why it's called metabolic surgery these days rather than weight loss surgery, because it's affecting your metabolism and your hormones more than anything else.
That's really interesting, because that shows you, I work as a GP, but I hadn't understood that whole, removing that hormonal tissue and the effects there. I literally just thought, well, you've got a smaller stomach, you're going to get fuller quicker. And that's why I had all these concerns really about when we tell people having large portions on a whole food plant-based diet, how are they going to do that if they've had part of their stomach removed? So it's good to hear. And of course, it has great results, doesn't it, in reversing conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure?
Yeah, absolutely. There's good evidence that having either a sleeve gastrectomy or a gastric bypass can certainly reduce and often completely reverse diabetes and hypertension in many people. And that's not because of the weight loss, it's because of the changes in the hormones. So my surgical colleagues tell me that very often they will be able to stop somebody's insulin on day 3 post-op when they haven't even lost any weight yet, because it's not about the weight, it's about the hormone changes. It is also about the weight, let's not be confused by that, but it's very possible to have changes instantly because of the changes in your hormones.
Just to rewind to the referral process again, so because I'm really interested in what you said about people being able to see a psychologist in the tier 3 service. I wasn't really aware of that either. As a GP, I think that'd be really valuable for some of my patients. What is the referral criteria and how much success do you see with the psychological programs?
Great question. So the referral process varies depending on where you are. So you would need to check your local policies and processes. So I work in 2 services because they're both part-time roles. So in one of them, at the moment, we only accept GP referrals, and you just write a letter to nutrition and dietetics and stipulate weight gain at the beginning. And that's your only access in, or through a consultant specialist who could do the same thing. In my other service, we have a link publicly available on our website, which is open to the public. And we just say, click here and give us your name, address, date of birth, email address, and we'll get in touch and we'll collect the rest of the data. You can refer yourself. And I imagine that each service has slightly different processes for contacting them. So do check with your local provider if you have one.
Is that for tier 3 service, so people can self-refer?
Yes.
Wow, I didn't know that. Some areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And then psychology, you asked me about that. Yes, hugely successful. People always say, like my colleagues say to me, oh, I really want to come to your service because I want to know about what diet I should be giving my patients. Now, here's the thing. Very often when I'm doing an initial assessment myself, because the whole team do them, we each do them individually. So I do some of them. And I'll take all the details, medical history, medication that they're taking, and look for any medication they may be taking that may be predisposing them to weight gain and change that if I can. You can't always. And then get to how we're going to help. And very often I say to people, okay, so if you were going to plan a day tomorrow where you were going to lose weight, and let's say, you could do anything. Let's not worry about your work or your relatives or your circumstances. Just you had a magic wand and you could do this diet and this exercise without any hindrance. What would you do for yourself? And everyone, bearing in mind my patients are largely omnivore, everyone says cereal or porridge for breakfast, and I would have fish and salad for lunch, and I would have chicken and veg for my dinner, and I would snack on fruit and nuts. And it's almost always a variation of that. And I say, bearing in mind it's an omnivore service, so I'm not allowed to say, well, you should really be whole food plant-based, which I'd love to say, but I have to stick with government guidelines. So I say, well, I agree that's a diet that would result in weight loss for you, even though I don't personally think it's the best. But I say, yes, I agree that you would lose weight if you followed that diet. What's the problem? And patients inevitably say to me, I just can't do it. Okay. And it's not usually because I can't cook or I can't afford it, or those are contributors, but almost always it's because my mindset, I just can't stick to it. I feel too deprived. I need to self-soothe. I've got these big emotional problems that I haven't dealt with, and I just can't face sticking to that when the alternative is I can eat these lovely treat foods that in the moment absolutely make me feel fantastic and they get me through my day and I can't do without them. So psychology is really where it's at. And I see people just after they finished our psychology program, usually, because then they want to consider having weight loss medication, which is something, again, I'm a huge fan of. And I asked them, what was it like before and what's it like now? And people usually tell me, wow, just even having a group program for I think ours is 10 weeks long, has transformed my thinking. And then if you actually get to see them one-to-one with a psychologist, if necessary, I've seen people be completely turned around. Just things like childhood trauma, difficult relationships, child loss, all sorts of really, really big, real problems. And the psychologist just sits them down and says, okay, let's have a look at how this is impacting how you're eating, and let's see if we can reframe things, shall we? And I've seen people transform literally from helpless to completely taking charge of their life and their diet, just from having a bit of support from a psychologist. So cannot recommend them highly enough.
Right, fantastic. Now, I know it's not your area of expertise, but as someone who has seen so many people struggling with their weight, when we think about all the policy suggestions that have been made to make it easier for people to be a healthy weight, be that, changes in school meals or changes in advertising or regulating, are there any ideas that are around at the moment that you think should be taken on by a government?
Wow, as you say, this isn't my area of expertise. So in terms of current policies, I think we're in a very difficult political situation at the moment, aren't we? And I think I don't follow politics that closely because it scares me, but my husband does. And I gather we have other things to worry about right now. But I would just love to see ways to get people to naturally avoid junk food. So ultra processed food is one of the biggest problems we have, even the vegan stuff, because we're all about whole food, plant-based, aren't we? So I'd be really interested in anything that naturally reduces people's tendency to buy ultra-processed food, to steer them away from anything that contains lots of refined sugar or artificial sweeteners, and to naturally lower the salt content of ready meals and those kinds of things. So gentle nudges, because we talk about being a nanny state, and if you have a proper, full-on, ultra-controlling nanny state, then I think people tend to rebel, don't they? But I think if you can just have gentle policies in place that just nudge people, so make the fruits and vegetables more accessible and cheaper, get people who are making ready meals to, or have legislation in place to reduce the salt and sugar content, and just those kind of things behind the scenes. I think if we get too militant about it, then we'll start to make some enemies. But I think those kind of gentle changes in the background would be a place to start.
Brilliant. Just a final question. Well, do you believe in tips for weight loss management? And if so, could you give us 2 or 3?
Okay. Now, with this, I do like to pick the ones that are very easy wins and maybe ones you wouldn't think of. Okay. So to make it really, really easy, get enough sleep. All right. So I belong to a gym, and it's one of those fanatical ones where everybody's there at 6:30 a.m. You will never see me there at 6:30 a.m. And I get criticized for that. And my answer is because my hours of sleep are 11 p.m. till 7 a.m. unless there's some kind of emergency. Get enough sleep. Okay. We live in a far too busy, stressful society, and we seem to think that 4 hours sleep and 20 hours of crazy productivity is some kind of badge of honor. It's really not. Okay. It's storing up health problems in the long term. Get your sleep. Okay. Number 2, drink enough water. Okay. Again, easy. Okay. It doesn't cost anything. I have some patients who say, oh, but I don't like drinking water. So that's something you need to overcome. But seriously, drink enough water. Your body doesn't differentiate very well between hunger and thirst. So if you think, well, hang on, I had some breakfast a couple of hours ago. I wouldn't expect to be feeling hungry right now, but here I am fancying some food. Could be cravings. It could be a number of things. And it could be just that you're thirsty. Okay. Keeping yourself hydrated keeps your energy levels up. It helps you to stay less tired, and it stops your body from telling you that it thinks it wants food when actually what it wants is hydration. So that'll be number 2. And then third one, if I can have a cheeky one, eat your greens. Okay. Your mother or your caregiver when you were little was absolutely right that the greens are the best things in the world. They've got the highest level of nutrients and they have the lowest energy density. So if you can base at least some of your meals around those, you are setting yourself up for a win. Those would be my top 3.
Those are all absolutely brilliant. And I think, I had a glass of water when I came in here, and I've managed to knock it over. So that's one drinking opportunity gone for me today. But what we're going to move on to is, after you've had your 3 or 4 glasses of water to fill yourself up tonight, Sue, what are you going to have for dinner?
Okay, well, it's Friday night, and in our house, Friday night is curry night. So I'll be looking forward to a lovely curry, and I make no apology whatsoever for that. I'm going to thoroughly enjoy it.
Sounds good. Claire, what are you having?
I want to know any particular curry, Sue. What ingredients are in there?
Well, it varies. I'm very blessed in my life to have a stay-at-home dad as a husband. So he actually does the cooking. So it'll be one of two things. It'll either be a chickpea curry based on tomatoes and coconut, or it'll be a shameless ready meal. My favorite is the Plant Pioneers chickenless tikka masala, and there's nothing to do with nutrition and nothing to do with anything to do with health. I just really like it. And for me, it happens to be the right amount of calories, which means I eat the whole thing, thoroughly enjoy it, and there's no waste. So that's it for me. But it may be my husband's chickpea curry instead. We'll just have to see what mood he's in.
Right. What am I having for dinner? Well, I'm having something where I have to cling on to the recipe book because it's a Japanese recipe and I haven't quite got the hang of doing it yet. But it's mapo tofu. So it's a kind of braised tofu in a black bean sauce, but it's got lots and lots of ingredients, including some whole grains in there. And then I usually serve that. It's quite spicy. It's got Szechuan pepper in it, lots of chili, garlic, ginger, and you thicken the sauce with a bit of corn flour. And I always serve it with a good portion of greens. That would be either like some spinach or some broccoli. So that's what I'm having. And Daisy, on to you.
Can I ask you about maple tofu? I've never tried it before. I've seen it. I've seen it online and things, and I keep thinking, am I going to cook this? How do you, what's it like?
Well, it's I don't know what difference it makes, but anyway, the recipe insists, and I've got a picture of it here. I just brought it over there. Can you see that?
Oh yeah, it looks lovely.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the recipe insists on sort of poaching it for 10 minutes or something before you put it in the sauce. I don't know what that does because the tofu always seems pretty watery and soft anyway, but anyway, you give it an extra poaching.
Oh, dinner at yours.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm on the Isle of Wight today.
Okay.
Bit of a trek.
Next week.
Yeah, go ahead, Daisy. It's still you.
Oh right, what am I having? So I bought those soya curls. I think we mentioned it in the last episode, maybe. I can't remember now when we talked about it. I'd not cooked with soya curls before, Sue, and I found them in an independent health food shop one day, and I just randomly thought, I'll try this. So I did actually make a curry with them a week ago, which I'm going to repeat again because it was so lovely. And it was really easy to make, actually. I just rehydrated them in some stock and put them into a curry sauce that I had pre-prepared with onions, garlic, chilies, lots of ginger, so the usual sort of curry base, fresh tomatoes. And then I added, the recipe called for some cashew cream, so I blended some cashew nuts, put that in. So it was a really gorgeous sort of tomatoey, creamy sauce. And then the soya curls go in there in the last minute. And you said, Claire, they don't need that long, actually. So they don't need to spend ages boiling or anything like that. I think I put them in the air fryer for a few minutes just to make them a little bit crispier on the outside.
You were talking about you were talking about soya chunks the other day. What's
soya
this?
Chunks. Sorry, is that what I mentioned? Yeah.
You mentioned soya curls, and Sue
didn't
say anything.
They're chunks, they're not massive chunks there. They're like little curls, so they're quite small actually. I think I don't know whether they'd be classified as curls or chunks, but they were really good in a curry. So I'm going to do that again tonight. Looking forward to it.
Right. I think we'll all lose weight, won't we, with our meals tonight?
Absolutely.
Or keep the weight off, whichever.
Well, look, Sue, thank you very much for joining us. We've learned so much. It's been really fascinating, actually. And I feel like I've got some real tangible sort of take-home messages to start trying in my consultations with patients. Thank you for your expertise and your time. We really appreciate it.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. It's been an honour to be here. Thank you for having me.